Okay, so here we are back again, back at the ranch, back with Marilyn, and actually this is going to be super fun and chilled. But so the last show we talked about some of your insights in the economy, well-being, and maybe we could talk about a little bit more about what you, given the state of the world today, like what do you see coming down the pike? Like what are we? Seems pretty dark and gloomy out there, and you sort of wonder who's winning here. Are the dark forces winning, and what gives us hope that we know how this story is going to end? Well, hopefully we know it'll end well, but how do we have sort of how do you in your experience of the mystical realms maintain your hope and your happy demeanor? Other than, I mean, no, yawning means you just need more spiritual oxygen.
No, I'm kind of laughing because this is a really important question. A lot of people are asking it these days because it is very true. People are actually starting to realize that there's a dark thrust going on in the world, and really don't know exactly how it's going to end in terms of for this particular cycle. About 20, 30 years ago, a huge thrust of energy was coming in from the eternal to bring humankind to a higher state of being. And what happened about 10 years ago, a huge dark thrust started really pummeling in. We always forget that the battles between principalities and powers are actually a real battle.
Right.
And
Thank you.
because they're a real battle, you can lose. So if they weren't real, then you couldn't lose. But because they are real battles between principalities and powers, either side can lose. And so right now we are in a period of a lot of darkness, a great deal of darkness, just like you said. The dark side has been making a lot of strides into the energies of the world. And so what we have is like a remnant of those who work for the light and who are still really trying hard. And this is how you can explain the yawning, because we're tired. We're tired. We're battling, and the battle, instead of getting better or easier, is getting a little more difficult. And it's a pretty tough push right now. So we have a couple of different possible outcomes, and of course there's always multitudinous outcomes, but along these lines, the original hope was to bring mankind and humankind to a higher spiritual vibration and awareness and thrust. But what could happen is it could go backwards. If the darkness wins these battles, humankind could actually go backwards. So, what we have a lot of evidence in archaeological finds and the historical texts and things that there have been, other world-ending events.
Atlantis or Lemuria, all those kind of legendary civilizations.
Well, legendary civilizations, but we also know that we had a world-ending events for dinosaurs and for different species. We had what they believed to be an asteroid hit that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. You had the Ice Age. But there are also evidences deep underground that there were nuclear wars, in our Earth's past. And so these would have been civilization-ending events where we're kind of blown back to the caveman era, so to speak. And in the mystical experiences I've had, I've seen both outcomes. It could go either way. But, why do we have hope? It's because there is this remnant, and it includes every single one of us who stands and exists and holds the light in this realm. And
I got just slammed as you were.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay.
We
Marilyn, speaking
forget
of
how powerful it is. Sometimes it's like, look at yourself as a place marker, especially when you're feeling, when you feel really frustrated with the things that we're seeing around us. Look at yourself as a place marker. I'm holding light in this location. I'm holding it. We're all holding it. None of us can hold it by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We need one another. So every single one of us has a great purpose in that we're holding the light, and then we all have our individual purposes that we fulfill on the ground as well. But the reason for our hope is always going to be our Lord Jesus Christ. It's going to be our desire for this entire realm to ascend upwards, which it can, but it's going to take a lot of work. And part of the thing that we have here is, if you go back to the understanding of what this realm has served for however long it's been in existence, as long as I'm aware of, it's served as a mortal realm. So, because these are the realms where the battles between good and evil reign and rage, in order to bring the realm to a higher expression, we have to actually completely alter that thrust. And we have a lot of souls who are, first of all, we have souls that are coming in from the darkness. We have souls that are coming in from a lot of illusions or delusions. And we also have souls who are coming in here with, missions of various kinds. So we have a real wide manifestation of states of soul. So, and then we have what we're seeing on the ground. And this is what is really making it a little tougher now, because what you have is the people who actually may have come in with destinies, programs, purposes to serve the light. We have a lot of those people falling because they're falling into secular, worldly type things, materialistic type things. It's really easy for people to fall off the plank, so to speak, and then we're pushing the majority over to that darkness. Then, so that's why you're seeing this. But on another point of hope, we haven't even reached the years that I was shown, which I'm not going to reveal, but the years that I was shown would be.
Oh, come on.
I'm not supposed to. I'm not allowed. They're coming.
No, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, we're we haven't even gotten to the point where I was told we would be in the time that would determine which way the world would go. So we're not there yet.
It feels that way too, right? It feels like inching closer to that, some type of tipping point, but
we are inching closer, and it's not that much further out now than it was a while back, but yeah, so it can look really, really dark, and it's always going to be before the final decision is made spiritually by humankind. There's a really good chance it's going to get darker, because the darkest night is before the dawn, and so that's what we're looking at. But we have a really hostile element in society right now. Another thing about that, and I'll just say that, and I'll take a pause here. But we forget that, if human beings cut themselves off from the flow that is the spirit, they cannot evolve, because that's how evolution moves through a human being, because we are spiritual beings.
Right.
And that's partly how the darkness is really making headway right now. First of all, you have people who are using certain beliefs in God on every side of the fence to do things that God would never ask, really horrific things. But then you have other people, and of course what that does is it takes the people who have no belief in God and makes them more self-righteous in their view, and that makes them more militant.
So what we've seen in, say, Sri Lanka or whatever. We see
Right. Yeah, you look at what happened you look at New Zealand and Sri Lanka, because that showed the both poles of this. So you had an attack against the Muslims and another attack against the Christians,
yeah.
and on and on and on and on. And so what most human beings are doing with these events is utilizing them for whatever their side of the argument might be. So if you're anti-Muslim, then you're going to say, oh, look what they did in Sri Lanka. If you're anti-Christian, you're going to say, well, look what they did in New Zealand. And so you have this constant fighting of the two opposite poles. And then you have that these events are only energizing people to even more strongly oppose the idea of God at all, rather than actually doing the work that's required of us as human beings, which is that we have to simply state that both acts were heinous acts against God, period. That's what they were. It's that simple. And these are not people, the people committing these acts around the world are not people who are holy people, people who love God, because if they were, they would never be committing acts like this. This is people who are being deceived by whatever force. So we have that, and then we have this materialistic thing, which comes down to the whole economy of well-being. Is the materialism is that people don't think they need God anymore. You also have just the secularism, where you've got to be really stupid if you believe in God. But see how all of these things put together, and there's a million other manifestations of it, whether it's through militant atheism or other types of things. Atheism is one thing, militant atheism is another, so they're different. So what happens is, generally, people are cutting off the actual force of energy that allows for the evolution of the human species. If you want to get, if you just want to understand the mechanics of existence, then you need to understand that. This is not a battle between religious beliefs or not religious beliefs, or between money or material. It's a battle between, do you want to cut off your head despite your feet? Because we will stand still if we do that, because we cannot evolve as human beings without the constant influx of the spirit moving through our bodies. We're not able to do that. That's something that comes from God. And for those who don't believe in God, it's the universal flow. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But you have to have it in order to raise your vibration and evolve as a human being and as a spirit. And so the spiritual consciousness right now is literally under attack by, people are trying to cut that flow off from.
Can we talk about that? Because, a man named David Hawkins, who wrote about consciousness, power versus force. When he was alive, he lived in Sedona area. Originally from New York. And at the time of his writing, he said human consciousness was actually on the rise in the world. And he would argue that a Mother Teresa could affect, 1 million Calcuttans because of her unconditional love consciousness. But it seems now that those who can actually calibrate consciousness are finding the consciousness has actually gone down, right? And so we're going into, and that means the darker realms or lower consciousness realms are shall we say, more dominant, and he's argued consciousness is logarithmic, so it's unequally distributed. So the point of the remnant needs to hold firm, and it's very hard, I explain to people, it's hard to be in unconditional love when you step out in the street, when there's relativism, nihilism, right?
Yes.
Seraphim Rose, the great Russian Orthodox, theologian from San Francisco wrote about, right? He said that he saw that coming even in the 70s. He said we would end up in this era. And Justin Paul Abraham, who I've mentioned to you from Cardiff, Wales, the company of Burning Hearts, wrote me and said, our role right now is to actually occupy and hold those spaces wherever we find ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so I asked the practical question, as a practical mystical question, is how do we actually occupy or reoccupy those spaces with love, with prayer, with the power that we're given? And I love Justin's reflection as, before the beginning. We say in the beginning, but Justin says, even before the beginning, God created us in God's image. So we existed in his mind, or God's mind, already before the creation. And therefore we have this incredible responsibility.
Yeah, and that's true. It was before the beginning. I like the way you put that too.
I love that. Yeah.
A lot of it really is, there's a lot of perseverance involved in making it happen, but it really is exactly what you said. We're holding it in prayer. We hold it in meditation. I'll tell you, for me, I've had to add a lot more meditative time along with my prayer time, because part of that is holding peace. So meditation is, when I'm doing the meditations, I'm trying to quiet the chatter and just holding peace in place, wherever my place might be. And so it's a lot of it's prayer and meditation, and it's also the discipline of going through these things, and then having to kind of you get hit with something in the world or something like that, and then you have to take yourself back to your quiet place. You have to go through the disciplined process of restructuring your thinking again. Okay, I'm in a bad space. I'm going back. I'm going to regenerate.
I did not want to call you this morning because I have one of those rare days where I just feel like it's not just the snow outside. It's like, okay, you feel kind of battled, or it's heavy, right? So you have.
It's funny because I relate on days like that. It's like I get up and I'm like, why did I get up today? I want to go back to bed. Let me try again.
Yeah. And it's funny for me because I'm an economist, so I have to, do work for money, and well, I don't have to, but of course I do. And so I love any excuse to procrastinate, because I know that the work you're talking about is the work we're supposed to be engaged in right now. Yet the other stuff is not that it's a distraction. It's just, given what you and I as a remnant know, right? The power of prayer, the power of holding these spaces, the power of love, right?
Yes.
The fact that we're not fully engaged in that, I mean, maybe you are more than I am, but and what a joy to be engaged in that too, right? What a privilege.
Well, you'd be surprised how frequently I struggle as well. And I think at least as much, if not even more, sometimes, just because I'm so sensitive to energy that I can get very easily discouraged at times. So right. I think that it might be surprising to people to realize, but yes, even those of us who might have like a mystical gift or something really struggles with this energy. And then trying to, I wanted to say, you saying being an economist, and I think we have to also remember to tell people, and you as well, that, we all have our own callings. And if everyone was a mystic, then my trash would be really high. That's right. My bank accounts would be like destroyed. And, we have to remember that your calling as an economist is a calling as well. And so, and everyone else who's listening has their work that they do, and their work isn't unimportant because it's not this, so to speak. It's all a part of this.
Yeah.
And it's so important. Yeah.
We're all part of this body, as St. Paul talks about, right? I mean,
yeah.
Not a guru that,
Yeah, but I can't tell you how many days or, whatever, or we see things that are happening around the world, or we deal with issues with families, extended families, with friends, or with communities, where spirituality is being more and more squashed or trampled upon, literally. We look at Sri Lanka, and that was, people just wanted to go celebrate the risen Christ. That's just insane behavior, but it's gotten to that point. And that's, that again is pointing out that it is a real battle. It's a real battle. It's not symbolic. It's not, you know what I mean? It's a real battle between principalities and powers. and that's the principalities and powers of good and evil. And we're seeing it around us every day. And every time we see an event like that, or what happened in New Zealand, I think we all feel like this sinking, real discouragement. It's
Yeah.
like, everything we're trying to do, and you had to go out and do that. You know what I mean? Or,
Yeah.
of all the things you could have chosen to do that could have been beautiful and creative for our world, and you went out and did that, and you just like, you want to go in your closet and
No,
hide from the world,
honestly, you look at the Sri Lanka, the story in Sri Lanka, right? It's the sons of this, one of the wealthiest, merchants in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka, my reading of them, it was an interesting country with, yes, it's had some obviously civil war issues, but really becoming a model for the economy well-being that I've been intrigued with, at least certain areas in Sri Lanka. And so you think, how these two brothers, one, becomes so obsessed with, such filled with hatred, and from this very privileged family, right? And then convinces his brother, and then his brother's wife, basically blows herself up with her unborn child and her three. It's like, it's madness. Like, you think,
It is madness.
what kind of, is that a kind of a demonic,
Yeah, you want to know how that happens? That's exactly
demonic?
it. What, remember, we require the Spirit of God to evolve. Hatred is the spirit of evil.
Yeah.
And so if a soul allows the spirit of hatred to come into them, that is basically kind of inviting all the different levels of possession, obsession, all those things. And so what can happen is a person can be totally normal, but if they start allowing hatred to come into them, it becomes a spirit that rules them. It changes the way they think. It changes the things that they do, and they become hateful, and they just hate people, or they hate somebody. You know what I mean? And then that's part of the principality and of the warfare, because you're either allowing God in, or you're allowing in something from a lower realm, and you do become, maybe not like clinically possessed, but you do become in a certain way you're possessed. And then some of these people actually do become literally possessed.
Perfectly possessed. If those of us who've studied exorcism or demonic deliverance prayer, the spectrum.
Well, yeah. And what you were saying too, you said, how do we hold our place? Well, this is it. Feed yourself that which is loving and that which is good. When you're feeling discouraged, give yourself the time to do the prayer and add the meditations, where you just hold peace, because sometimes part of processing out the evil and the darkness is just holding a place of peace. There's nothing to say. You don't need to have a conversation with God. You just need to hold some peace. But then you want to look at, okay, what are you feeding your spirit and your soul? So, in a case of like you and I, we'd probably go pick up something on mystical theology, which is going to help me put myself in a better space. Now, there's a lot of things that are being put out there now that are hate rhetoric. So we have a whole generation of people and youth who are being fed hatred. And so if you feed yourself hatred, you are going to become hatred, and you're going to become capable of doing totally stupid and crazy and evil things like this, So what we want to do to hold our place is that we surround ourselves, and we need to be disciplined enough to be aware of what we are feeding our souls. And, it can happen to anybody, even someone who may be really aligned with the light and with God. If they start feeding themselves hatred or feeding themselves anger, because there are a lot of people, darkness usually comes with a few characteristics: hatred, anger, vindictiveness, vengefulness. It's a very unforgiving place.
Lots of suicide. Yeah.
Yes, there's just a lot of dark things that can come in from that that just, so if you start feeling those things, that's a warning to you that you need to go to your secluded private place and regenerate, in all of these different ways. And don't feel bad about withdrawing as much as you're able to within the confines of your calling,
Mm-hmm.
to regenerate and to get that contamination, completely thrown out. Because it's so interesting that we don't realize how dangerous that contamination can be. It can happen to any of us if we are, how Jesus said, I would spit out the lukewarm souls. And ironically, in the Divine Mercy devotion, when you do the novena, the one that Jesus speaks about as being the most difficult for him are the lukewarm souls. This is partly why, because if you're lukewarm, you will be fed darkness, and you can be taken down very, very easily.
I remember reading Malachi Martin's book on possession, right?
Right.
And it was creepy. I couldn't actually read it because it reminded me that it's so easy to slide slowly. Even if you're a priest, like even if you're religious,
Mm-hmm.
to do slowly into, potentially a state of perfect possession. And
and that's so important for people to realize, because that is, how else would the dark side work? They're going to use the things that work the best and that people are least likely to notice. So, for instance, materialism, that doesn't seem like such a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Secularism. So what's the big deal? We don't need God. Well, that doesn't sound real threatening unless you are energetically sensitive and understand, well, you're talking about cutting people off from the evolutionary force of our world,
Right.
And then, the other one, which is the one that most of the exorcists say was the most brilliant, was convince people there is no such thing as the dark side. And, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But it's just not true. And, we see the fact that evil exists as a force in our world. We don't have to see it mystically to know it's there, but mystics can definitely verify that it is, but we see that in these actions that have occurred just recently. And unfortunately, we've seen it way too much in many violent actions around the world.
Yeah. So things are ramping up. Well, both in a good and it's like, okay, it's showtime. What a privilege to be living at this time in human history.
Yeah.
Having the insights, that we have, being the remnant, and not in a self, proclaiming egotistical way. Just
no, not at all.
It's also lonely because so many people around us don't get it. They're confused. Why does even of economics, ask questions. I'm going to Colombia to have a conversation about wise cities. And I'm like, but all of the stuff that's going on right now, the monetary system, no one's fixing that. Like we could sit and drink mojitos and have these wonderful conversations, but the big structural changes, that civilization of love that's possible, is not part of the conversation yet. And it's frustrating because
I would imagine so, yeah.
I know what's possible on Monday, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also reflecting on the amazing kind of insights. Brene Brown, I don't know if you've listened to her. She's this just exploding phenomena, psychologist, but she's on Netflix, and her YouTube, her TED Talk got huge following because she boldly proclaimed, as an introvert, she said, the greatest mystery is vulnerability. That when you make yourself vulnerable, you actually open the gate to belonging, love, and joy.
Yes.
What a great mystery that when I made myself vulnerable, right, to the other, and I also acknowledge I don't have all the answers, but that this is the great triumph, and this is what economics is full of such lies, because it argues that when we isolate each other for ourselves, when we build fences between our homes, and when you just go inward looking to your own utility maximization function, as if there's such a thing, right? Then you get cut off from the love of the other, and we lose compassion, right? And so, what an amazing acclamation, and she's got huge audiences who are following her in Texas and saying, thank you for speaking the truth. That being vulnerable is a great mystery. And
well, and I agree with that in a lot of ways. It is a real tough balance between the self-protection required in the spiritual discernment and being vulnerable in an appropriate way that doesn't set us up for untoward attacks, I guess. But it is a very important thing, because even in my own work, what I've seen a lot of is a lot of people do feel very isolated. And, because I write a lot of books and I get a lot of emails from people, I have this unique insight into what people are thinking privately.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, because one of the simplest and most helpful things that I can tell people is, oh, I've heard this one from a lot of people. You are not alone. You are not alone. Because, the reality is that we do all try very hard to, portray ourselves in a certain way on the surface. And even you just talking about, you woke up this morning not feeling like this was something you wanted to do. That's a good thing, because there are a bunch of other people out there feeling the exact same thing.
There's a lot of people are waking up. And I don't suffer from mental illness. Like I don't have depression issues. But this morning I would say I had touched that feeling, right?
Well, I think anytime that we're facing such horrific, like, terrorist attacks that we've seen in the last couple of months, I think that people will feel the energetic, that's a terrible event that resonates through humankind, and we feel it. We're going to feel a little bit of depression, because it's a huge casualty event that was filled with a lot of rage and anger and evil, and it was just not a good thing. The other thing we can also remind ourselves of, which is not helpful but sort of helpful, is just remembering, for me as a mystic, when I have my moments and I'm really sad, I'm a mother, so I think about, oh my God, you hear about these families who lost all their children. You hear about these families, these horrible stories. And then I remind myself of the things that I've seen about, children or other people dying and the journey that they go to. And I remind myself, I know that they're experiencing this. They were crossing over in a moment when they were actually worshiping God, whether they were the Muslims worshiping God or the Christians worshiping God, and God has their back, and they're having a beautiful experience. But we grieve with the families who are going to grieve here. There's no way that we can get around feeling that ironically, on the universal consciousness level. It's something that's like a bomb hitting universal consciousness, anytime any of these events occurs, or these wars, all these things. So right. That is true. But, but what I do hear from people a lot is, they think that things that they feel, or their frustrations, or the things that upset them, or they think they're alone in them. And it's really interesting from my standpoint, how many of us have, and this is exactly what the woman you just mentioned is speaking of, is that we all have those, and we all feel a certain sense of peace when we realize that we are not alone in that. And that's where the vulnerability is coming in and saying, it's okay that I'm not perfect. It's okay that, some days I just, don't do as well as others. I'm not always in a state of joy and happiness, but I'm trying to do what I can to move through this life. Yeah. And part of moving through this life is being present for all of our brothers and sisters who are moving through difficult or really painful times. And so we remind ourselves that that vulnerability is truly freeing, and it does truly create the opportunities for true love to come through. Because, you know, especially when people are going through really difficult times, whether it's just a minor personal crisis or someone going through a horrific event, losing somebody that they love, that is an opportunity where we actually can utilize that energy that comes from God into us and channel love to these other people. That's how we create that stream of light between human beings that moves throughout humanity. And that's really, really important. As we do that, we change the potential of what this realm can achieve.
Well,
so every individual who does that is changing that potential.
I think I can speak from my own experience of, you know, when people say, when I say, you know, someone's whatever has a struggling or their father's dying or something, and I say, and now I understand, if I say, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for your family, I'll pray for your father, and even that moment, even if I don't sit down and do a rosary or something, or say a structured prayer, even that moment of thought or reflection of lifting that person up to the light by name is affecting them.
Yes.
And so often I'll say, were you like praying at this particular moment? And often it's like, yeah, but it was for a split second, maybe.
It was a thought. It was
just the thought that
offering a thought to God on their behalf. Yes, exactly.
And you're right, holding space, sitting with someone. I mean, for me, like, this conversation's therapy for me, right? Because I needed it.
Me too.
Yeah, and that's the joy, like the reciprocal, you know, explain. I was like, isn't it wonderful? Like, say, imagine if life was just about helping each other's souls develop fully, or full capacity. Then all we need to do is keep encouraging each other, saying, we're not crazy. You're on the path of love. You know, you're created and you're one in being with God. Therefore, the illusion is we're separated. We're not separate.
We're not separated.
That's the lie. The lie is that you know, the fallen angels want us to believe that we're separate. And that, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just, they're just jealous. Like, why wouldn't they be jealous? They were cast out of heaven. Right there.
Well, and the thing too, I mean, one of the things that is real important to just understand, a simple concept about light versus dark. You know, light is creative and creation continues to create.
Right.
Darkness is destruction, and destruction ends things. It just destroys things. Everything becomes dead. Everything becomes dead. And when I use the word dead, I mean it in a spiritual sense, but obviously it also applies physically. But, you know, even if someone wants to just discern their own actions forward, am I being creative? Am I being destructive? And then those are ways that you can discern and say, okay, I think I'm going to a little bit to the destructive side here. I want to change that, alter it, and turn that back.
Right.
That's really important, because that is exactly what happens. So yeah.
So help me. I know this is really getting out, you know, maybe divulging some of my own downloads.
That's okay. I think your listeners probably appreciate hearing the process.
Well,
I appreciate hearing the process.
I mean, first of all, it's a bit edgy to even be recording this and potentially putting it out there, because you know, I'm exposing myself in a sense of vulnerability.
Right.
When I was told personally, you watch and wait, right? Your time is not, you will know when the time is right. You know exactly what to do when the time is right.
Yeah.
And what's being revealed to me is we have the power, I'll call it, we have the power of love, power meaning to be able in French. We have the gift of prayer. We can, in a sense, pray into the matrix.
Yes.
The matrix can fall in a moment. You and I could decide to start praying, joined by 10 others, and it might all be contained and over. At least, you know, that's my image. You know, if you know, I was sent to London, England, to pray into the square mile. Okay? Sounds crazy. I was told
Not to me, but yeah, go ahead.
drop sacred tobacco, cover it with the precious blood of Jesus, right? I was in Beijing 2005 and God said, cover it with my precious blood, right? You and I know what that means. It sounds crazy, but
not to me, but yes.
You do it and you say things like, oh, and the trees talk to me. What do you mean the tree? The trees in Tiananmen Square talked to me, right? And said, make sure my people don't forget. I said, forget what? Right? And so when the trees talk to you, you think, oh, I better check myself in, right? Because no. So on a practical,
I think it's part of spiritual advancement is where we become able to have communication with animals, with trees, and even just with all life within the spectrum of life. So it's not, but I know why you think that there are people who would think that, but I definitely do not.
So the practical question is, what prevents us? And then I'm also privy to the ancient Polynesian tradition of Ho'oponopono, which is it means to make right what is right. In a sense, it means to return to love, which is love is who you are. Glenda Green, love is, Jesus says to Glenda, that is the only truth. That's the essence of, and yet the Atlanteans, some say, the Atlanteans are telling us, don't forget love, right?
Yeah.
My friend Judy in New York, who's now being captured in the darkness of the Matrix, right? Said Atlanteans have come to her and said, don't forget love. I go to Tahiti, they talk about Lemuria, the hidden, right? The Atlantis, the Pacific. So here we are with a practical question, right? How do we exercise, maybe that's the wrong word, but the percussion of love, knowing how did the walls of Jericho come down? Not initially with the trumpets, by circling in silence in prayer, with frequency of love. And then, right? So all of that's possible, I believe. Right now, at this moment, we could do that. But the question is, maybe it's a rhetorical question. Why is it not happening? Why isn't it being proclaimed from the churches, from our so-called Christian leaders, right? When you and I know, I'm not talking madness here. Justin Paul Abraham is drunk. He says ecstasy is out of your mind.
Yep.
I know when you're in ecstasy, you're in glory. You're like, I'm drunk on the Holy Spirit. I know anything's possible. And yet there's so few that seem awake. And sometimes we're isolated. Like I can't get to Justin Paul Abraham. I mean, he wasn't very far away last week during the Easter weekend.
Right.
But am I just supposed to get on a plane and go see Justin and go, okay, strategy of prayer, let's do it. How are we gonna end this matrix? Or are we supposed to be just quiet and patient and let God's kind of full revelation, that's the
I'm going to go into some mystical experiences here. I mean, there's quite a few questions in that. I'll try to hit them all if I remember. But you remind me if
I'll remind you if you miss any.
Yeah, because there's really good answers to all of that. I mean, I remember years ago having this vision, and I was told by the angels, why do you keep trying to save a world which serves its function to perfection? And so we need to remember that this world serves the function that God deigns, not that we deign. And so we know it is a world that serves both good and evil. This is an evolutionary sphere. It's a place of purification. So we know that that is the function of this world. So when we look at what kind of impact what we're trying to do might have, you need to realize that when you're doing this and you are funneling this love, that you are already doing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're not going to be required to bring every soul under that fold. That's God's job. That's the job of the Holy Spirit. We're just not equipped to handle that. So each and every one of us, as we make those steps forward and try to create those links of light between people, we're doing it. We are actually doing it, even though there are always going to be things going on around us indicating that other people may not be. There are other people who are. It's just going to be all over the place. One thing that I really love that Mother Teresa said that I practice every single day, which is real simple, is smiling. Ironically, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk teacher,
no, it's true, right?
He has a smiling meditation, you know, but Mother Teresa said start with a smile. And, you know, you were talking about the disconnectedness between people. And so when I'm out in the world, or if I run into somebody walking my dog or at the store, I smile at them. And you know how there's so many people that won't smile back, you know, and it's like, what would happen if we all just started smiling at each other? Because once you smile at somebody, you're saying, I welcome you. I honor you. I'm safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do I know you? No, I'm just smiling at you. I'm not hitting on you. I'm just like.
It's kind of like, you know, what we forget how meaningful that can be to people. You know, it's funny because like, I'll have lots of different reactions to it. I don't do it in a weird way. You know, it's just natural. But some people might be uncomfortable. And then there are sometimes other people who will approach me and say, you know, I was having a really crappy day. Thank you so much for just smiling and saying hello to me. You know, so we don't realize little tiny things, we're doing it. That's how we create the civilization of love. We're choosing it. If everyone around us doesn't choose it, we don't have the power to impact it. We're going to choose it on a daily basis. And like, should I just get on an airplane and go? I would say that my take would be you try to see what's in the flow, because here you are holding space where you're at, doing what you're doing. And God may have a different plan for how you're going to continue linking up with souls that are kind of in your band of alliances, you know? And if that becomes something that should happen, I think it will become something that you feel very compelled to do. But
right.
So I think it's not something that you first of all have to figure out right away, but I also think it's always good to look at what is in the flow around us, you know. I remember I had a priest years ago, and I loved him, Father Eddie and Dari, in good memory. He he used to talk a lot about how he was a funny guy, and he was a good priest because he was very commonsensical. And he would talk a lot about how, oh, everyone's telling me they want to go be a missionary overseas. And he's like, be a missionary in your own backyard. Stop talking about going all over the world. Do it in your own backyard. We need it everywhere, you know? And I think that applies to all of us, to remind ourselves, you know, God places us in different locations for reasons as well. And, you know, and I do feel like when we really need to do something, we feel compelled to do it. Like you were talking about your Colombia trip. You felt obviously strongly enough. That was totally in the flow. You're doing it. If you're supposed to go.
No, I was just invited out of the blue, right?
Right, yeah.
I didn't initiate it. It seemed like, how did they find you? I don't know. They just like, suddenly I looked at this invitation list. I'm going to be with Madam Brundtland from you know, what? It's a ridiculous list. The former president of Nigeria, former president of Bolivia, the former prime minister of Greece, former president of Slovenia. Like, what am I doing here? Former prime minister of Ireland.
Let me say something about that, because I mean, first of all, what a great thing that there are all these former world leaders that want to talk about this.
I know.
Secondly, what a great thing it is that they included you in this. And that seems like, to me, that seems like, you know, a band of alliances kind of encounter here, where God is setting it up, because you guys are creating this stream of light between all of you, which then you guys will all return to your points in the world to continue sending that stream of light. You know, you had spoken early about the frustration that, you know, it's all talking, but, you know, a lot of times with big changes in consciousness, or even just changes on the ground in society, things have to be talked about first. So you can't minimize the importance of people starting to want to talk about it. How do we change it? Because
it's changing the narrative, right? I mean, that's what as an economist, it's funny. It's like we're so obsessed with measurement, right?
Yeah.
Somehow objective measurement, but in fact, it's only by changing. Well, only in conversation. Indigenous people knew this. The stories, right? We tell ourselves the new narrative, the new meme that emerges, right? So if we plant the seed, civilization of love, I'm going to plant that seed in Korea in September.
Let's do it. You go, Mark. That's awesome.
You plant it in a country which is full of loving Christian energy, and you say, why not go from ecological civilization to a civilization of love?
Right.
And why not believe that God has great plans for China, your big, giant neighbor, which seems really full of darkness? But in fact, God has a great miracle in mind. He will bless.
You know what this comes back to as well, because exactly what you're saying, when you mentioned earlier, you asked the question about why aren't they talking about it in the pulpits? And there's a real simple answer, is because, when revelation comes to humankind, it is coming in a mystical sense, an out-of-body travel type state most of the time.
Yeah.
And what happens is that societies need to pull that down into some form of structure.
Yes.
So the simple, quick answer is they get too caught up in details on the ground. They forget that all of the dogmas, the theologies, those are important and they're valid and I love them. But the essence issue is God is love. Therefore, God being love is always supersedent to moral dogma, things like this. We have to start with love, because love is God. The energy of God is love. That's what transforms. So if we hit people with something below that, of, oh, you can't fit because you're this or you're that, or you're, then we're limiting God by doing that. We literally have the easiest job, and so do the priests in the pulpits, which is love one another as I have loved you.
It's so easy, isn't it? And
yeah.
Can we talk about that? I mean,
sure.
One of my favorite saints is Saint Francis.
Me too. Mine too.
And Claire, because we had his little groupies, but unlike what we just saw in Sri Lanka, this young man, right, who would have gone on the Crusades, right, and got injured, and then had mystical experiences, and gives up on his father's, wealthy textile trade.
Yep.
And has ecstatic experiences, and then, at least according to the movies I've watched, is like, so he has these incredible mystical experiences, and then his followers realize, gosh, Francis is going to die soon. Like, please write it down. And he says, write it down. Like, what am I supposed to write down? I can't write down my mystical experiences. I can't expect you to have the same experiences I have. And yet our desire is, please write down the rules. Please give us the cookbook, right?
Right.
But the mystics know that that's not possible. Like, even Aquinas, at the end of his life, he says, everything I've written is but straw.
Exactly.
How could this man of the greatest theologian, of our era, come to that conclusion? And so I wonder what it is about humanity's desire. We want to have things sort of written down. We want structured prayer. And yet just to have an ecstatic experience, as a mystic is sufficient.
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting as well, St. Francis is a great example because of a lot of reasons. Recently, not too long ago, a few months ago, because I'm very into St. Francis too. I've seen St. Francis many times mystically, and he's a very holy, peaceful, wonderful energy. And a few months ago, I was taken back to experience St. Francis before his conversion.
Whoa.
And I was terrified. You have to remember, he was in the Crusades.
He was a knight. He
was scary. He was violent. He was vile. And and I was told during this experience, everyone starts there. But St. Francis, what a beautiful example of what happens when we allow the love of God to continue to move through us, because who he is now, when you see his soul now, it's this beautiful peace, transformation. And that's what we have to allow into our lives. But yes, we do want to put things into structure. And the Spirit of God is not a structured thing. That's material world type stuff. And when we try to put the love of God into structure, there's always going to be flaws. It's not possible to do that without limiting God, which we are not to do. We're not to limit God. You know, St. Francis was a soldier. He engaged in vicious, violent acts. He was vain. You know, one of the things I love, I wish I had it right in front of me, but I have all the writings of St. Francis and the First Franciscan order in the first centuries. And there's this biography written by, I think it might be Thomas of Solano, but I'm not sure, about St. Francis. And it starts out with, St. Francis was one of the most vile, vain, and stupid human beings that could have ever walked the earth. You know, and this is like one of his best friends later in life. You know, but he did not lie about it. He was totally honest that, you know, you need to know that he was the most vain, vile man, you know, because if you don't understand that, then you have this idea of thinking he was born from the womb levitating.
Oh,
you know?
he was like St. Paul, right? He got knocked off his horse.
Yeah.
He got injured on the way to Jerusalem, and you know, it's like,
yeah. And that's, you know, that's where we allow God to move, where we don't limit God in his actions. But what we have to remember is, yes, we live by a moral law. We have codes, we have theologies, and they're all very, very valid. But we have to remember that love is above that, because we are all under the, you know, we're all under the stain of sin or karmic tendencies or vices. You know, we all have issues, you know, that would not be in a line with any of those things. Theologies, dogmas, they all serve that purpose of, you know, providing us with a framework of what things will look like as we progress. But if we judge ourselves and others by that, no one can meet it, because it's not intended for that, because we are born as fallen individuals. The dogmas are intended as a model that we can seek towards, not as something that we judge our fellow men by, or that we focus on deciding who's in the club and who's out of the club based on. We need to start with the love of God, because that's how a civilization of love actually then exists. Ironically, in the mystical heavens, that's how a civilization of love exists, because the light of God is everywhere. And, you know, the light of God is not everywhere here. So those of us trying to hold that space, that's what we're trying to do. But when you're in the highest, the heavens, the love of God literally lights up the sky. It is everywhere.
That's what Justin talks about. Abraham is like, yeah, when you're taken up, right? He says, when you go through the floor and then you're taken up the heavenly realms. Our friend Linda's Sabbath too, you know, experienced that glory, the ecstasy, and that is as real as the sky is blue, and the light is magnificent, right? And so,
well, and you know, here's another real important point. You reminded me of Linda. Reminded me of this. This is so important, because, you know, when we're taken up into this glory, part of the purpose of that is the same that the dogmas might provide to us on the ground, because it's showing us what is attainable and what is possible, what we can bring back to earth. But we forget that this gloriousness is it's intended to be a part of our human experience. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you're lifted up into the heavens, you're seeing and feeling what love is. You're filled with the love of God. Everything around you vibrates at the frequency of love, whether it's the sky, the trees,
Yeah.
the little critters like the one I have here. It all vibrates with the frequency of love. We forget that this is, ironically, you talk about a civilization based on happiness and love. This is exactly what we're trying to do here as human beings. We want to become that love to our fellow man, because that is what is going to be required of us to evolve forward into a higher sphere of existence, a higher state of human being.
Yeah.
And what it does is just like then we add the things on the ground, like mystical theology, moral theology, these dogmas, they're all part of helping us to train our mind into the higher understanding of God. It's not for the purpose of judgment. It's for the purpose of cultivation.
Right.
Because we're here because none of us can live up to those ideals. They are ideals, but we can't live up to them here because we're not at that space evolutionary wise. So we use them as points of reference as we try to move closer and closer towards that civilization of love within our own selves and within our communities and with our world.
Right.
But if we forget that they're guiding posts and we use them for tools of judgment, then we have forgotten the first law, which is God is love. He loves every creation that he's created. And his wish for every creation is that they will be filled with love, not with hatred. But there are ample opportunities in the world today for people, if they're not really discerning about what's going into their hearts and minds, to lose their ability to see that they could be taking in a lot of hatred. And it happens very, very gradually, as you said, because that's, if it were really sudden, it would be harder for people to notice that it was happening,
Well, thank you. You've taken my entire book, the operating manual of a civilization of love, and rendered to one line, which I always said, if I took just 2 lines of the whole Bible, it's like, God is love, love God and love your neighbor.
Yes.
As God loves us. Can you, I want to read to you what Justin Paul Abraham wrote me and get your reflections, because I think now he too has had these out-of-body experiences. He's clearly, and he's former banker, and he's a kind of weird story, but like St. Francis, right? Just like, and then he encounters Enoch, and Enoch goes, who's Enoch? Like, pre-flood guy, right?
Yeah.
Enoch is glorious. Enoch is like shining, and he's taken up to heaven, and so he's shown, and he says, so he writes, because I wrote him boldly, he said, hey, I'm this guy in Edmonton, and I'm interested in love and, common well-being. And he says, I once saw the entire world, he said, would have a new economic system based on well-being, fulfillment, and happiness. I saw the nations of the world would compete with each other to better the lives of their people. So he's like, they would rate themselves on this and seek to build happier nations and healthier people. One day, communities will be built around this concept. It will be an era of much joy and peace. I call it a scroll-based economy, he says, where we live in the beauty of the dance. And Paul says, God is the dance, right? So we live in the beauty of the dance. The living scrolls, bracket books, which are written in heaven. So he's saying we need to be in touch with the scrolls that are written in heaven, right? For us to, revisit. In the meantime, we are dealing with powerful structures of injustice. The challenge, he says, is immense. I do believe, though, a second banking crisis is coming way beyond the last one, because we did not change anything, he says. However, I was also shown that it will be delayed until we, the ecclesia, so now he's using a heavy word, ecclesia, are able to occupy the space. Now, he calls the space Zion, because we need to return to Zion. And people say, what's Zion? Zion, Jerusalem? What is Zion, right? There will be those who are able to govern the future wisely. In other words, like Israel, we are being given the land in stages. It is opening up, and the possibilities are vast.
I think that's amazing. I think it's awesome. And I agree with him that the challenges to make that happen are immense, but even just the fact that he was a former banker, and he has, he has the same kind of interesting background that you have. I think God will be calling people from those realms to make this and bring it about.
Right.
But it's going to take a lot of effort and work and a restructuring of the way people think,
So,
but I kind of feel like I see some of that happening.
Right.
A little bit already. It's just not on the level that he's talking about. So we're seeing like maybe the little birth pangs of I'm hearing some things in different countries that seem to indicate that these kinds of new ways of thinking are entering into the minds of some leaders. Even the fact that you're going to have that gathering indicates it's entering into the mind. And
it's a place I would have said I am never entering, because I consider those covens of darkness.
Yeah.
Right? Where, because I've studied the architecture of power. It's infested with oftentimes the Luciferic consciousness.
Yeah.
And why would God put me into those circles?
I'll tell you why.
Thank you.
Because your job is to hold the light and bring it in.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's it's really that simple. Because all of us are going to be called into places that make us a little uncomfortable, but the reasons are very simple. Is because someone has to do it. Someone has to go in and bring the light in to that sphere that has been closed off to any kind of higher thinking for millennia. And so that's what you're going to do. You're going to bring the light in. But one of the things you want to do is be careful not to be infected by any false views that you might hear. So you want to stand in that light as you're there, so that you keep that discernment on strong.
Yeah, and I know when I've experienced being countered by the money power. Like rarely do I get challenged. It's interesting because I can speak, almost like the jester in the court, saying, this thing is all like illusion, the money system, and it's just a few people running the matrix, right? And so the few intelligent ones who say, oh, I know what you're doing, you're not allowed to say those things. And so, when I look at courageous people like Yanis Varoufakis, who was the finance minister of Greece, right? And he's so impressive because he calls out, right, the fact that these key European bankers, right, the German finance minister, basically agreed with them that to encumber Greece with yet another 100 billion of debt would destroy the children, would extinguish hope. And yet he said, but it's politically expedient for me to do that. I have no alternative, right? It's like unbelievable. And this man is now running for the European Parliament because he was kicked out. Basically he called her bluff. He said, we're not doing it. We're not signing. And basically they got rid of him, right? But fortunately, he's an economist. He's an academic. He was teaching the U.S. So it's like, for him, it's like, whatever, I could speak from this other vantage point now.
Yeah.
But I love his courage, he's a very fit, guy and very, male. He's got young energy. And anyways, it's encouraging to have an economist of his stature sort of say, on Monday we could do all these things, right? We could end this madness, right? But you're right. Each of us has a little part to play in the civilization of love as it emerges slowly. right? And,
Yeah. Well, you know, Pastor Howard Storm had said he was the near-death experiencer who went to hell and then called out for the help of God, even though he was an atheist at the time, and had this beautiful experience. He shared in several of his interviews how Jesus turned to him at one point because he called for Jesus and Jesus came, and he became a pastor after his near-death experience, not before, because he was an
yeah,
atheist.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, he Jesus looks at him and says, "I want you to go back and save the world." And
Wow.
Howard is like, "Oh my God, oh my God!" He's like overwhelmed. He's like, "How am I supposed to do that?" And Jesus looked at him, and the way he put it was so funny. He said, he looked at me like, "What are you, stupid?" You know, He's like, not just you and the millions of other people that I have sent, you know, you do your part and they're going to do their part. And I've sent you all to save the world. And so, you know, it's a good reminder to all of us to realize that we're just a little part of it. We're not responsible for the whole body of the action. You know, we are responsible for our little corners of the action, and that there's a lot of help, you know, a lot of help from he mentioned all the angels that had been sent around it as well.
I was going to ask you about that. That was my other question, because Justin talks about angels. He said we sort of forget that the angels are just, they're like, I'm waiting. Like, you know, I'm here. Why do you think I'm here? Why do you think I'm called your guardian angel? Or, why is Raphael always on my right hand shoulder? You know, it's like, that's his archangel of healing. And so,
yeah.
But
and,
we don't call on the angels.
If we allow, by doing everything that we can to be in that state of love, to, you know, do the prayers, the meditations, and also the spiritual reading that helps to keep us focused on the creation, not the destruction.
Yeah.
Being aware of what we're allowing in, if it's affecting our abilities to do that. If we do all those things, then the angels can move and work through us. If we don't, then we become like little dead holes. They can't reach us anymore, and then we can't be of assistance. And then the obvious worst part of that is if you go in the opposite direction, which can happen. So we want to keep that communication, that transporting area between the human being and the spirit realm open, so that we can be utilized. And the good news is that none of us has to really know how everything fits into the big scheme of things, because God's got that covered. You know, the Holy Spirit is responsible for that. So when we're asked to do things we don't understand, was okay, well, I'm counting on you, God, that you know what this is all about, you know. But we try to maintain that creative spirit, which is of God, and that loving spirit, which is of God, which makes us usable instruments, you know.
Yeah. I love your I know you keep doing this because it's
I use my hands a lot with motion, because when I do this, and you know, for the audience who can only hear, you know, I'm speaking of this, I do this with my hands, where I'm showing like where the energy flow goes literally from heaven to earth, through our hearts, through our chakra system.
That's right.
It's circular.
That's what I wanted to say is from the chakra perspective, what my friend Judy in New York taught me was, you know, if we're open, we're like a funnel, like the crown chakra, right? That
very well said, and exactly that is exactly.
Yeah, if it's closed off, there's nothing, right? There's energy isn't coming down. If we're not grounded to the hara line, to the right into the earth, and we're also untethered. So we have to continually be this instrument of this channel of peace, of love.
Yes.
Keep the funnel open, right? And
exactly.
Yeah,
and that's so important. The energy is something that's hard to show or explain, but there is like it's like a circular motion of energy that prayer provides between humankind and the angels, that just moves from heaven to earth, to heaven to earth, to heaven to earth. We want to stay in that continuum. And that's all the things we've talked about are the ways that we stay within that continuum, because then we become able to be of use. And And don't validate or invalidate whatever your level of use may be, because everything is vital.
I think that's a really great reflection, is don't invalidate. I would say, well, I can't invalidate your mystical experience. Like it's not, it's your experience, right?
Yep.
You've been very vulnerable and open about her experiences. And it's like, you know what? Maybe Marilyn's been to hell and heaven and all these places and out of body, and she's been to Pleiades and wherever she comes from. I don't know. But it's not mine to judge. It's like your experience. And I feel grateful that you're willing to share, and I'm willing to reciprocate my weird experiences, which aren't weird at all. Like we're just normal. We're having normal human.
There will come a time, and I've been shown things that I was told would come to pass in my lifetime that have come to pass, that I was really surprised, because at the time I was told they would, in terms of scientific development, consciousness development. I didn't think it was possible for it to happen in my lifetime. But there will come a time where the spiritual and the understanding and the living in more worlds than just three-dimensional will be normal. It will be something very, very common.
Yeah, this is what Justin talks about too. Justin talks about, there are already technologies we know of. For example, he goes, there's Oxford scientists who have developed cars that will just use oxygen.
That's amazing. That's
they'll harvest the water from the atmosphere to power the engine and break that hydrogen oxygen bond and create the hydrogen necessary for, like, we know that's possible. But I also know something important, that, as you would know, going to the lower realms, that oil that we extract, right?
Yes.
Is a very low consciousness product.
Yes.
So we're, in a sense, extracting things from lower realms, which we probably shouldn't be touching. But there are products.
It is relevant at this time in the development of the human being.
But imagine a world where we don't need combustion engines anymore.
Yeah, and I think that will happen.
It's the end of oil. And imagine if you never had to pay another 50 cents on every dollar to usury, right?
Yeah.
You'd have a 20-hour work week, not a 40 or 50-hour work week. Imagine if we actually developed graphene. Graphene is going to be the latest one atomic layer, carbon layer stronger than steel, one atomic layer.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard of graphene.
Can you imagine this could be my super shield, like my graphene shield, and it just looks like carbon on a paper. And that's a product that, guess what, calibrates at 500 Hawkins scale, which is love.
Yes.
So you're like, wait a minute, I'm working with the woman who's part of the graphene company here in Edmonton. And she says, what are you talking about, Connie? She's a Christian woman. I said, do you know, Donna, that graphene calibrates in the vibration of love? She goes, what? Goes, yeah. And what does oil vibrate? Almost like luciferic, almost, right? Very low vibration. That means graphene wants to come into the world, right? It is the product of a civilization of love. But to get the transition, right, from a lower consciousness product to this, which actually is naturally occurring too, by the way, right? Graphene.
Right.
Is going to be a monumental task, because consciousness is logarithmic, so it's going to be difficult to move. But your responsibility is to provide products that make it more and more acceptable. Imagine your new bike with a plastic frame, recycled plastic, with a coating of graphene that's stronger than titanium.
Yeah. That
will never wear out, because it's like all this technology is within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and there's so much more too, technologically wise, that is really going to emerge, even in the areas of consciousness.
Yeah.
Quantum physics as well. There's a lot of interesting things that are going to be generating. You talk about the matrix, which is in essence the fields. And so, all of these things are going to be filled up with something. And so those of us who care what it's filled up with, we want to fill it with love and light.
Yeah.
And make sure it's not filled up with something else that would be less, it would be contraindicated to the evolution of the human soul.
Can I ask you without revealing your full revelations? 'Cause I'm guessing it might be part of it. I mean, one of the images I've had around the climate issue, climate change, is, I've delved into measuring the key known drivers of climate change, right?
Okay.
And I've discovered that at least 50% or more is actually the dynamic of human consciousness.
Interesting.
Both both negative, right? Oh,
Yeah.
the world's going to end. We're doomed. Oceans are rising, right? So maybe they'll just suicide, or you know what? God has a creation nature will figure this out. We'll get through this, right? So the other drivers that we say, carbon combustion. Russians say solar flares, which is a big driver. Americans say no solar flares. Russians say it's about, So question is, what hope do you have that what's actually climate change revealing in your mind in terms of God's kind of on a divine mystical level? What do you see happening?
I haven't been shown that much about climate change. I have been shown things about more like celestial possible events that could happen that would affect the earth. I do think that what climate change does represent, as well as, just the things that are going on with humankind and the types of warfare that have become possible, they all present to us a time where the earth may have to renew herself. And we know what's happened at other times when the earth needed to renew. We've had ice ages, floods, asteroids hit the earth, volcanic periods. So there could be, it could happen in a number of ways, and a lot does depend on consciousness. Our Lady appeared in Fatima and told us that there were all these things that could happen, and it depended on whether or not we prayed for certain things.
Right.
It's still relevant, even though the Fatima prophecies, the church says that they have all been fulfilled, but the message is still always going to be relevant, that we learn from just her words alone, that our prayers and our actions and our conscious thinking that we project forward impacts world events. And so, with climate change, we may see, certain places that are land becoming underwater, and vice versa. We may see whole new lands because of volcanic activity. Anything could happen if an asteroid hits the earth, and I've had visions about that possibility. And the reality is that a lot of these things could happen, either one or all of them, and that would impact the outcome. For instance, if the warring between nations becomes a part of that as well, or nuclear power, we're looking at literally blasting ourselves back into the Stone Age. And one of the things I was told years ago in a vision was, you must fulfill the function of your survival. And so a big part of what that meant, and what I was shown subsequently, was that we need to be prepared for any of these kinds of events, if they do occur, to actually rise up and be pushing towards a higher human consciousness from those who have survived. But however, we also need to remember that we don't want to energize any of those possibilities. We want to pray that they do not require coming about that way. And Our Lady of Fatima made it clear that we have that potential to do that by what we pray for. And so
not only pray, but I would say, I just said, we have technology.
Yep.
I could change the world banking system on Monday, and it would end half the.
They would let you, yes, if they would let you.
They would let me. Half the reason why we have to keep growing would end.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that which would take half the carbon pressure off the planet immediately.
Yep.
You just do the math, and you're like, all of these things are possible on Monday, but we continue to pretend or whatever, we're just ignorant, or we just lack the capacity to act in a just way, in a loving way.
I think a big part of it is that when people need to work towards moving in those directions together more.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many obstacles that the current systems of government place in the way of those who really want to do things that could catastrophically change outcomes.
Yeah, it's like they want the world in flames. There's an element that wants catastrophe.
Well, there is that element, and ironically, with there was, like, in the ISIS fighters were believing in some type of apocalyptic view that they had, and that was, so what they ended up doing was, because they believed in this apocalyptic view, they were actually going out and trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
And Christians have an apocalyptic mindset as well, and what we need to remember is the apocalyptic time is not something that we want to encourage. It's something that we want to do everything possible to avert through prayer, through action, through all these things. So when you're aware of the warnings, which apocalyptic visions are warnings, you want to do things to prevent it, not get into the mindset, oh, this has to happen in order for this time to come. Absolutely. It doesn't have to happen that way.
Thank you. Yeah.
It doesn't have to happen that way. But yeah, we have to look at how do we work better together. And, even between countries, because I know, like, I'm in the United States and you're in Canada, and we have totally separate governmental systems, but we share the same landmass, and there's so many discussions and arguments that people end up getting so caught up in the trees that it's impossible for them to get anything done, like you're saying. And I don't know how the Canadian government works, but I would imagine a lot of the world governments do seem to have this bureaucratic thing. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of people that want to see this fiery doom, except for, like, these fringe groups that we talked about. But I think that people are hesitant to move forward when, even though it's uncomfortable, that is why we're here. We need to move forward, and they're hesitant to move forward. They like things to be the status quo. They don't like to embrace change. And this is partly what happens when you just look at the difference between the light and dark energies, creation and destruction. So they're wavering somewhere in the middle, between.
Actually, that's an amazing reflection. I mean, one thing I've taken from this conversation is we are constantly co-creating.
Yes.
Our reality. So
yes,
we're one being with the co-creator. But if we get stuck in limbo,
yes,
in a kind of flaccid place, and possibly death itself, then we are antithetical to the co-creation that we're called to be part of.
Right.
So co-creation is, we never know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we continually strive to create the conditions. I mean, in natural systems, we call it moving always towards a homeostasis, always towards harmony, right?
Right.
And never necessarily staying there, but constantly trying to, right? And
well, and there has to be also, I think there's also, there has to be more of a connection between different generations in this process. There does tend to be a little bit of a disconnect that we see, where we need the younger people to be more reflective of the middle-aged, the older, the people with experience in terms of bringing about specific changes. But we all have to accept that when movement goes forward, mistakes will be made. People will go in with the intention for one thing to occur, and they'll find out, okay, that didn't work, so we need to try something different. But part of the way that we avert a lot of mistakes is by getting rid of that disconnect, where we need to glean from the older generations, the middle generations, all the knowledge that people have down, and then we have the younger people who may have the energy, to actually put some things into play. But the ideas have to be well informed by experience and by by the elders in all these different fields, so that obvious mistakes, we don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again and making the same mistakes. That's what often I'm seeing happen in the cycles of the human experience. We have to start changing that dynamic to a more constructive, again, higher creation, more constructive. It has to allow for the knowledge of previous generations and the current generations to work together. And the different countries, the boundaries between countries, because we do share land masses. You know, I mean, the reality is it's going to affect all of us, but we're all trying to solve it separately. And that's going to be how it is right now. But even what you're about to embark upon is an excellent example of the fact that the Holy Spirit is already moving in the direction of trying to rise up within people who are in those positions to recognize the need for more of a multinational approach to making some of these changes occur.
Yes.
And that's really important.
Very important. And former world leaders who are, Justin Abraham said, Moses only became a teacher when he turned 80.
Yeah, I read that.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
And God kept him alive long enough because he said, well, I needed your body so that you could appear, right, with Elijah.
Right.
In the transfiguration. So, but the devil really wanted his body, right? He would have
right
his body. And I thought, wait a minute. So at 80 is the age of like wisdom of, right?
We cannot lose, you know, I know I see this a lot in the United States, where there is the lack of respect for the elders who have this experience that goes back like 100 years.
Yes.
And, you know, the younger generation has a unique experience too, in that they are much more adept at the new technologies. But it doesn't change the fact that there is a great deal of wisdom as to how to apply those technologies based on many generations, but you know, between them and like those who are in their 80s and 90s, who have seen how things, you know, well, this worked because, and this did not work because. We have to take that wisdom. We cannot cut that out because it's all part of, you know, how Christ well, say Paul talks about the body of Christ and the different body parts, the head being the same as the feet. You know, this is also applicable to us as societies and as peoples. Right. And when we cut off our elders, or when we cut off the people in between, or the youth who have the new technologies to come in, we're cutting off the energy, just like you are between creation and God, if you are not allowing yourself to receive the influx of all these forms of wisdom that would make it more likely that the action taken would be more well-informed and more likely to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I mean, the reflection again on creativity. We see the creativity in your young people, and then I know that tends to, then we sort of put them into into schools, and we call it education, but education from Latin means to draw forth what's within you.
Yeah.
We try to stuff stuff into them, mathematics, whatever. And I said,
they go into those institutions, and we expect them to come out knowing how to draw forth.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily always come out knowing how to do that. And so we need to help them with drawing that forth out, because that is going to be necessary in order to create that. But we don't want that separation or those dividing lines between generations, between different people who work in governments, between governments and world powers. In the bigger picture, it would be really good if there could be a community between all those forces. And like I said, I have seen some of that happening. It's just very slow, very slow.
But what you're calling for too is almost like a recognizing that human beings tend to be, risk averse, averse of change, right? That we get accustomed to customs.
That's a big part of what impedes individual human beings from making spiritual progress in this life. That is such an important point, because we are here to make spiritual progress.
Right.
That's one of those things that you just remind yourself of when you find yourself getting stuck. And I don't want to have to deal with this change. We are here to make those spiritual changes. So we don't want to waste time.
Right. So I'm thinking in the economic sense of, we need to create the conditions where creativity flourishes, right? It's not delightful that innovation is encouraged, even in big bureaucracies.
Right.
Right, within governments and that. So, because so often, I mean, having worked in government, you know, the control is usually on information, but the creativity that is suppressed is really frustrating. And so we need to create conditions where creativity flourishes, and where you in touch with the joy you feel when you're creative, when you're whether you're a musician or you're an economist or whatever it is. I mean,
well, and that even applies to science and technology and really everything, because we have to remember that God is always sending souls in with, you know, who are infused with destiny. We don't want to squelch it. We don't want to squelch it, but we do have a lot of things in place, systems in place that have a tendency to squelch destiny. We don't want to do that. We want to bring that out, because God knows what gifts we need to reach that goal of that civilization of love. Yeah. We don't. We have only the small little picture that is our own life and the little we learn from others, but God knows it all. And so it's so important to remember that God is always sending souls in with these new constructs, and we want to be listening with a discerning spirit and allowing that, you know, the creativity to flourish, so that these things can actually come to pass. We do, you know, a lot of people are squelched, you know, and we don't want to see that happening, because that's lost potential for the realm. You know, we want people to be able to bring forth that which has been given to them by the Father. We want them to be able to bring that forth. And our societal structures do have a tendency to block it in a lot of people. We don't want that. So that is one of the things we're going to have to address going forward. But we also want it all to be well informed, which requires that it moves across the spectrum of time, that we're not, you know, so even like the ones who are coming in with this, whatever their influx might be, that they're well informing that influx, because there are ways to manifest it that are going to be more effective than just what they might think of themselves with the lack of experience. So we want the experience to be an influx into the creativity.
Right. Wow. Well, I think I've come to the end of my tape. No, just kidding. But I'm thinking maybe we call our show Practical Economic Mysticism, or Economic Mysticism. It'll be a YouTube channel, and a true channel. And
okay. I'm game. Yeah, that sounds fun.
I'm willing to play with, you know, creating this YouTube, you know, platform where, and we can have other people join, but it could be, it will just be a sidebar, but people will find us, and right.
And I'll link it up to all my stuff too. So, you know, we'll link it up to a standing audience that we can start with, you know.
This has been really fun too.
Yeah, it is. It's always fun talking to you, Mark.
I feel like, you know, you're my therapist, and so I feel a little bit more hopeful. And
I'm glad you feel that way. I mean, it's always fun for me to talk to you too, and it helps me to talk to you too. It's, you know, therapy-wise as well. Yeah. Ironically, you know, when two or more are gathered in my name, you know, there I am. And
there I am. Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me.
I wish you could feel what I just got hit with. Oh my goodness, someone's here with us.
Yeah, me too. I just got hit too. Stop doing that.
Make a wild guess as to who. But you know,
scare me like that. Like, just kidding. Hate when they say that.
I really got slammed when I said, so as soon as I said that, you know. So maybe God wanted us to know that yes, I'm with you when you're talking about these things, you know.
No, I feel that way too. I feel it's really great. So thank you for well, thank you God. Thank you for Holy Spirit. Thank you.
Yeah, you should tell Jen I said hi.
I
haven't seen
will.
her in a while. I think I saw her on the Skype maybe 6 months ago. But
Still, I'm glad she's not here. Like I probably wouldn't be doing this if she was actually here, because she's like, what are you doing? Because she's such an interesting spouse. You know, I'm sure you sometimes with Andy too. You're like, why am I with you? Like,
I relate. Oh my God, I relate. You know,
I could never even have a 5-minute conversation like this with her. She said, you're just crazy. Like, you're just like.
well, you know what's funny about my spouse is he doesn't have any problem believing what I do and being very supportive of it. However, he's kind of like, I always tell him, you're like a zombie, you know. So literally, I'll try to talk to him about something deep, and he'll be like, and no response.
No, and I get that with Jen, except Jen has a very informed, you know, and I always say to her, it's like, you know what, Jen, it's like, the only thing I know is that I'm, as she is too, I'm curious about people's individual experiences, right?
Yes.
And I love people's stories. I don't judge them for being what I think might be just whacked out or crazy. It's like, no, everyone has an interesting story. And that's what motivates me to converse with people, right?
Well, you know, it's so true, because it even applies, you know, to the ancient sacred texts. You know, a lot of the interviews I've done recently, I've talked about how you know, this ancient sacred texts to me represent the last thoughts of a soul that is graduating from this realm.
Oh yeah,
So,
sure.
you know, so speaking to other people and their experiences is very similar, because I know, like, when my kids were growing up, I would say, oh, I need to go talk to my friend St. Augustine, which meant I needed to go read his book, you know, or I need to go talk to St. Faustina right now, you know, but because that's what it feels like to me, is that I'm allowing them to speak to me their experience, and that informs my own experience. And it also allows me to see a much wider view of God, because it doesn't just include my own experience. I'm taking in what God has revealed to many over millennia, you know, and that's important. It gives us a much bigger understanding of God, you know.
I've ever told you my insights into Jen, like the moment where we probably had the most incredible soul-to-soul experience was in silence, and in a ceremony of mutual appreciation, right after smudging, right?
Yeah.
With my indigenous friend, and I had that glimpse, like maybe she's just a really old soul, like, because she doesn't like to reduce things like, well, I know this about God, or, you know, if anything, she is motivated by the, you know, injustice.
Yeah.
People are violent to each other, why people harm each other, that human, you know, the motivation behind that. So basically insights into, and she wouldn't say evil, all right? So I think, well, maybe there's this great cosmic joke that I'm married to a really old soul that doesn't need to explain God, doesn't need to try to figure out the way we do, or, you know, and it's okay. It's just, it's the way it is, you know, and I respect her, and she's my rock, and she's like Peter to me. So
Yeah.
and it just remains a mystery. Marriage is a mystery. Like,
it is a mystery. It is a mystery.
you know.
You know, Andy and I we came to the point where he just agrees to leave the house when I'm going to do an interview.
Well, I'll tell Jen next time, or I go to the basement. I go in my
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because you know, we don't have a huge house or anything. We got about 1,600 square feet, and so there's not a lot of places to send him, you know. But it's interesting. It's about the same size as the house we had in Cortez. It's similar, you know, just different. But he'll it's like he has a hard time understanding the noise thing, and some of these radio shows are really really worried about noise. You know, they even asked me to do a whole interview with a headset and a blanket over my head on one of them to put out background noise. Anyway, one time,
That's right.
I'm like, okay, Andy, you need to go in that room because he'll go, if he's home, he'll go in this room. And I just need to be quiet right now. And this is a show where it's like they're really anal about it. You know, I'm putting the blanket on my head. And he's like, I got it. We're cool. I'm going to be quiet now. And he goes in his room. I go on the air. It's live. And all of a sudden there's he's blowing his freaking deviated septum nose. And I'm just trying not to lose my train of thought.
I know what that is. Yeah.
So Jen and Andy would probably enjoy cracking jokes about putting up with us doing our thing.
So remember that what you gave me?
I sure do. I'm glad you still have it.
All the nice silver fell off, and now the chains are all gold. And
Okay.
but I still remember Jen walking into your place, and all I remember is like the oxygen just went out of her, and I think she actually almost fell on her knees because she was so blown away by what was in your.
In a good way or a bad way or somewhere in between.
She just said, you have the weirdest friends. Like, what is that? We went to like Dairy Queen, and we went to pizza.
Remember the Dairy Queen? Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh my.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting mystery marriage, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you know, as you continue to grow older and your kids grow up and everything, all the dynamics merge and change and everything as you grow and change. And you know, you don't always grow and change in exactly the same directions, and you're always trying to make something that works energy wise. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so.
Wow.
That's funny. I had some pretty cool stuff at that house. You guys have to come down here and see the new version, because the new version is even more out there.
What?
I have like Buddhas all over the house, and I have the meditating Jesus over here, and I have paintings by Josephine Wall, who is this mystical artist. So I've got the veil over here and the mystical breath in my bedroom. And
oh my goodness.
Oh, I love it. And I've got little fairyland up there. I've got all these, I call them my pure lands. So I have a Padre Pio land. I have St. Kateri Tekakwitha land. I have this little land over here, which is the 7 archangels and the Holy Trinity, and then St. Clare and St. Francis. And then, of course, the Buddha indoor mission. And there's all kinds of them behind me, too. Like right behind me here, you'll see.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, those are my cherub. All my cherubs are up here.
Oh, wow.
And then over here, let's see if you can see any of it. Over here.
Cherubs over there. Wow.
Yeah, I have St. Michael and all the angels. And that's our sorrowful mother there with the guardian angel.
Right.
And then over here, I actually have Nefertiti and King Tut.
What?
And lots of icons, because Andy was in Kosovo. See, those icons are all hand-painted icons from the Orthodox tradition.
Yeah, I love them.
You know, while I'm doing this, I'm going to show you some of my Pure Lands.
Yeah.
Whether you want to see them or not, I'm going to show you. Don't worry, I'll only show you just a little bit. But what you guys should come down here, because I'll have to show you. Here is my Mother Earth table. Where did you go? Did I lose you? Okay, there it is.
So you're interested.
Lady Gaia.
So
Over here I have my Buddha in the Pure Land.
Yeah. A Buddha with a cross on it. That is wild.
I know. I like to do wild things. I have Buddhas with crosses all over the house.
That's sacrilege.
Oh, look at this. This is my little fairy realm.
Aw, like your little unicorns and flying and Pegasus.
Yeah. So this is my little realm that, like, if I'm having a blue day, I will look at fairyland and remind myself of the mystical heavens. And okay, I have to go there a little bit. And here's one of my altars. there's Buddha in Dormition, and there's Claire and Francis.
Aw.
Then this is the Archangel realm here.
Jeez.
And, oh, here's one of the Saint Kateri realms.
Wait a minute, are there 7 archangels?
There are.
There.
Oh, you're gonna love my Padre Pio land, I think.
Yeah, let's see Padre Pio world.
Here's Padre Pio land. Look at this. It's so cool because the angel there, this one.
Yeah, yeah.
She's got her hands up to her lips saying shh.
Ooh.
It's so cool. And you know, so there's Padre Pio and another angel, and you know, I put the cross icon there because that's what he was all about, you know.
Right.
So,
oh, absolutely.
here in Tekakwitha's wilderness. I love Saint Kateri, and this is the.
You like Saint Kateri?
I love her.
Wow, she is beautiful.
She is totally beautiful. I love her, and that's my meditating Jesus. Got Jesus on the beach.
Have you encountered Kateri?
I have, but you know what's interesting is that Andy has encountered Kateri a whole lot.
Really?
Yeah, you know, he had before I had the 2 surgeries down here at the Mayo Clinic, and the first one was kind of a big deal, and actually I almost didn't make it through because I stopped breathing and kind of died while I had that. But, I kind of died, and it was kind of scary because I did stop breathing during this procedure, and then when I came out of the anesthesia, I couldn't exhale. It was a really, really difficult thing to experience. It's very freaky, you know, because you're like, I can't exhale, you know. So anyway, I had some weird reaction to anesthesia. But when I was going to have that surgery, it wasn't. I'll let you look at that's. I don't know if you remember, but Andy used to be a concert pianist.
I was going to say, well, whose piano was that? He was a concert pianist?
Yes, he was. And
That's
this is
crazy.
so I've got this Our Lady of the Roses right over his piano. Oh. You guys, when you come down, if you ever do, which I hope you do, or maybe sometime on Skype. Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah.
I should hear Andy play because you won't believe it. You know, you're like, how do you do that, dude?
This is my piano.
Oh, that's a pretty piano. Is that?
It's a Yamaha.
It's a Yamaha. Cool. That's. Do you play piano?
Yeah, I do.
I did not know that.
This is the Red Deer. I'm not as talented as Andy. That's the Red Deer River. Where this is the table.
What is that river? It's the something river where what happened?
Red Deer River in Alberta. This is our dining room. This is the redwood table I just built.
You built it? Oh, I love it. And I love the crystal chandelier.
That's Jen's grandmother from probably like 100 or more years old.
Oh, that is awesome.
Here's a painting I painted.
Oh, that's beautiful, Mark.
And this watercolor. You see the watercolor?
Yes.
I painted that.
Oh, that's pretty.
And this is our...
I love that table you built. That is beautiful. Andy would love that.
This is our living room, and Stephanie is painting. She loves painting, like little youngest.
Oh, that's really nice. And I like we have a white couch set too, and I really like it because it lightens up, you know, the space energy-wise.
It's called a cloud too. The couch is from California.
They call it a cloud. I love it. That's fantastic.
It's all down. It's all downfilled. It's kind of irritating to sit on sometimes, but
yeah.
Yes. Check this out. So this is our. I'll walk you through the house.
Okay.
I love paintings. This is a new painting I got for Jen for our 25th anniversary.
Oh, can I see the top of it?
Oh.
There we go. Okay. Oh, that's very pretty. I love paintings too. I totally relate.
This is actually a group of 7 famous artists from.
Oh, pretty.
Yeah.
Sort of. I see the bottom half.
Oh, is that better?
That's better. Oh, I love that. You know, I used to canoe when I was in Ohio. Canoeing was a thing there, and I loved that.
That's a door. I call it dory. And then, so this is. I love
your staircase. Those are nice. Did you refinish those, or were they just always?
Oh, this house is 1909, so it's.
I thought it was older, because didn't it belong to someone in your family before?
Nope.
It didn't. Okay.
It was built by the first editor of the first newspaper in Edmonton.
Really?
So
Cool.
it's got lots of character. And then I'll just show you this. This is our it's one of our favorite paintings. It's Bruno Cote. Can you see it?
Yeah, that one's pretty. I like that one a lot because I like the color, the bright colors.
And this is me from my time in Egypt.
Oh, you look good, Mark. You were looking good in Egypt.
Actually, that's just Mark and Egyptian characters, and that's
No, I'm kidding.
that's the journey of the soul, right? When your feathers wade and check this out. You'll appreciate this. So, see this?
Is that St. Francis?
No. This is a brass rubbing of a tomb in Salisbury Cathedral, which was Jen's great ancestor who financed the building of Salisbury Cathedral.
Wow.
12th century. So I said, you were Catholic once, so don't.
Yeah, so deal with it.
Deal with it. I'm going to go talk to Henry VIII. I'll stand on his tomb.
Andy all the time, I'm like, just deal with it.
Just deal with it.
Move on. Let me show you some of my mystical painter stuff. I'll show you some of these. I think you're going to really love her. I think. We'll see. I will let you decide. When I did this house, I wanted it to feel like you were walking into a mystical realm. So